Hello and welcome back to another Warlords of Draenor model preview. So this time it's going to be for the LFR sets of gear, and you may be thinking, well, that's a bit weird, that wasn't there in Mists of Pandaria. You'd absolutely be correct. These appear to be new sets that drop only in LFR mode, which I guess would at least suggest to us that LFR gear is going to be different in terms of appearance from raiding gear, from like kind of organized raiding gear. So that's definitely interesting. However, Blizzard did recently say that they have not made an announcement on this topic yet, but there will be one quite soon detailing what they're changing, what they're doing, and why they're doing it. So that's really all we can say about that. But let's just have a talk about the pieces themselves. So the one you're currently looking at is the cloth armor. And, well, unfortunately, this human's hairstyle is rather terrible. And by the way, data mined by MMO Champion. I couldn't find the model anywhere else. And I have no idea how to, model view things in their new file system. Anyway, so, what do I think of this set? Well, I like the shoulders, actually. I like that kind of fur thing they've got going on there. It's kind of, I guess, nice and warm, but it just makes sense with the whole Draenor feel. I feel like, also, there's maybe something missing. There's a lot of kind of skin showing on it, which, not something that whatever, but the actual issue that I have with that is I don't really think it fits the rest of the set, and Draenor is pretty damn harsh and cold. I'd imagine you'd want to wrap up in lots of furs and that kind of thing, and then also just some of the lines there feel a little bit too abrupt to me, so I think that's why maybe more of a full kind of set in that regard would be a bit nicer. Anyway, that's that coloring. Let's move on to the next one. This one I actually think is looking quite a bit better. The previous set was not too keen in the colors. I think this one's pretty good. The detailing's nice. The blue, or not the blue, pardon, the green looks quite well on the shoulder, on the bracers. But I'm actually not really too convinced by the helm there. It's this bizarre little clip-on thingy at the front. I just don't think it works, if I'm honest. I'm not too keen in that. Especially because it seems like it's trying to do something cool and interesting with the crystal here, but then it just looks like a kind of regular crappy old helm that doesn't particularly look that clothish. So that's a bit strange. And also the gloves, they just don't do a great deal, if I'm honest. I think they're a little bit dull looking. And then finally we have this set, which is a bit more colourful, yes, and that extra vibrancy is nice. But I'm just still not, I'm not convinced by this set, I'll be honest with you, I'm not really convinced. And one thing I suppose I should say that I do like is, when you kind of look at these, which is where my mouse is at the minute, when you look there, from afar, it's got this kind of like nice little 3D effect, and I think that the shading in the actual creases of the fabric looks very good. And as always, we have a nice old WWE belt, because mages are completely on par with Hulk Hogan. So, next, let's move on to the leather set. Well, the leather set is interesting. This is data mined stuff, though. And I think that because this is data mined, I don't know what's going on with this shoulder. I mean, sure, the shoulder looks like it fits color scheme-wise, but it's a tad big, don't you think? It's utterly absurd, that shoulder, so look, hopefully that's a thing that will be fixed. And as for the shoulder itself, I mean, yeah, it's got a cool little sort of detailing and styling going on with it. But once again, this is leather armor, and I've looked at the various sites. This is leather. This is marked as leather at the minute. And again, I'm not particularly sure that some of this stuff really looks too leathery, though I do think that the legs are pretty decent for what they're trying to be. Same goes for the boots and the chest as well. Overall, that does feel like a kind of low-key leather sort of thing, and that's something that's going to appeal to some people and not going to appeal to others. A lot of people have thought that gear sets have maybe got a little bit crazy over the last while in terms of the complexity and the random things that are thrown on them. So I suppose this is a bit more simple, but I'm just not particularly sure that it's that great. As for the helm, I think it's okay. A lot of the helms, though, they seem to be looking like they've got these... just the shape of them, if you compare the helms, I think they're similar in a way. I'm not too sure if I really like the two helms. Shoulder-wise, though, I'm not sure. I think maybe if the current shoulder plate on this guy's left-hand side was just a tiny bit bigger, and then this one was replaced with that, or maybe you just had a smaller version of this thingy, then it could look a bit better. Okay, let's move on to the next set. This is the green one. And, yeah, I mean, hey, it's green and blue. I think the blue looks better. the green, look, green's just one of those colors. Some people like it, some people don't. I'm someone who generally finds green to be a little bit boring at times. You know, just a little bit boring, so that's maybe a little bit unfortunate. I think the belt on this is that a... I thought that was a glass of wine for a second. Belt, once again, it's just kind of stuck on belt, but it looks decent enough. And then, I think also, are these, like, do a lot of people wear shirts on their characters? Because I think if you had a bad shirt, this gear wouldn't really look too good, so go shirt hunting, people. And let's just have a look at the final set, which I think, it's actually pretty decent, this one. Again, shoulders are a problem to me, but I think the little gold highlights are pretty good. Though, I suppose some people might think that they look just a little bit washed out. I don't particularly mind in the case of this set, though. Not sure why. Usually I'm not a big fan of washed out styling. Anyway, that's leather done. Next, let's move on to mail. And, yeah, okay, this totally does look like mail, but parts of this set would also, I think, look very good in a rogue, which is unfortunate. And I actually like the mail set. I do. I think it's pretty decent. Okay, let's start off with the red, or just the primary color of the gear. I like the kind of... I just like the way these all match, and especially just the shading on them is, in my opinion, very, very nice. That's a lot of depth to those bits of armor, and I think that's something that I definitely appreciate a lot. Looks really good. Then as for the helm, I love that helm. I really love that helm. As a hunter, I think that's going to look great. Yeah, so very good. I don't think this would look as great in a shaman, though, and I suppose I am looking at this mail gear from the perspective of a hunter. Another slight issue, actually let's just move on to the next recolor. Alright, so here's the green one. Color-wise, it's not really as much my thing. Anyway, as I was going to say, the belt here is this thing that's bolted on. By the way, Blizzard just seem to, things like belts and shoulders, they just kind of like get bolted onto a texture that's applied to your character's body. I think that looks pretty decent. It's a little bit simple, but it's not a ginormous WWE belt, so that's okay. That's the thing. Now, also, the shoulders, just the way they're kind of stuck on. I wish Blizzard would just have this way of making all the armor feel bulky. Like, if you just look at this, that's painted onto the texture of the human mail. If that was just a little bit more 3D in terms of the actual piece of armor itself, rather than just the shading of the texture, then I think it might look a little bit better. Okay, then finally we have this one. And, yeah, hey, look, it's the purple set. I think, whatever, I don't particularly mind. Though I do like the kind of little, would you call it underbody bit? The bit of the armor that's under the, well, this plate here. I think that looks pretty decent. It sort of goes well with the other brown parts of the gear. It does make it look like it's just kind of a bunch of leather underneath and then some mail on top, which is apparently very brutal and savage. You know, another thing I didn't mention as well, the shoulders, I think the spikes on them are looking great. And thankfully, they're not ultra spiky, and they're low-key enough to still do the job. So that's good. And then finally we have the plate set. I'm not particularly convinced this looks great on the human. I'm not sure why, but I don't know, it just feels like there's something off. Though, in essence, I do think this is a pretty decent set. It seems like there's some transparency issues going on there with the model viewer. That's a little bit unfortunate. So, again, very, very early alpha. Now, what do I think of this? Well, this base bit of gear I think would look fine if... I just think that this skin here kind of takes away from the color palette, so we'd have to see this on a character wearing a shirt. And it's another set that's just full of horns. There's 1, 2, 3, 4... Yeah, there's... there is 8 horns on this thing. 8 horns, and one of them's broken, so I guess 7.5. Yeah, maybe a little bit too over-horning on this one, I think. Just a tad too much. I think from the back, the profile of the gear is pretty good, apart from the horns and the shoulders. Yeah, let's just move on to the next one. A little bit more of a cold color palette, and I think this one looks great, actually. I prefer it to the other one. Overall, it's pretty damn solid. Another thing I like is the boots. They feel nice and chunky, so I think that's pretty cool. Yep, there's that. And then finally we have this color, which doesn't do so much for me, and unfortunately does have a humongous WWE belt. Look at that thing. Just think for a second, like, if you try to put on a belt like that takes up, you know, goes way down to your legs, up above your fucking belly or whatever. It's big. It's a big belt. I'm not too sure about the big belts. I'm looking at the helm there. I think the helm's actually pretty good. I just don't know about these horns and the shoulders. Maybe they're just a little bit too much. Still, overall color palette, I think this is a pretty decent bit of gear. I think it's better than the Tier 17 Warrior set, for sure. Or not the Tier 17. No. Tier 17 Warrior is fantastic. Check the video on my channel. But the Tier 16 Warrior, I think, looks vastly inferior to this. So that's okay for me. It doesn't, like, this doesn't have loads of shiny beacons and lights and things on it. So, in essence, yeah, these are LFR sets. I don't know, like, what the gear plans are going to be for LFR at all. But we're going to find out this week. I'm pretty sure that we'll get a blog post or something this week. And yeah, it's funny, by putting out the alpha, they've allowed things like this to be sort of data mined and released and talked about before they get to do it officially, which is interesting. Basically, if you don't know, by the way, the reason the alpha actually came out when it did is because Blizzard needed their staff at home to test it, so they needed to deploy it to servers. They didn't want to release the alpha notes or anything like that, but apparently they kind of had to. So, yeah, that's just what I've heard. Anyway, that's it for this video. I think some of these sets are a little bit iffy, some of them are pretty good, but it's definitely going to be, as always, down to personal preference. Anyway, thank you for watching the video, and I will see you next time.